Another action word that we see here is let. And we're going to talk about marriage here. Let marriage be held in honor among all. This is such a good word for us today because marriage in our society is not held in honor at all. It has really taken a back seat. And I see this seeping into the church in a lot of different ways, but how we see marriage not held in honor is we see record numbers of people not getting married anymore. We continue to see the majority of marriages ending in divorce. And we see a lot of young people's trends are that they're really, we can live together, we can sleep together, we can do all these things, but marriage is really like, why would I want to entangle myself? It is disregarded as unneeded and not honored at all in society. And how I've seen that in different ways seep into the church, I think the church generally for a long time has held marriage in high esteem. But what has happened is people that are single have felt marginalized by that. And so whenever you have something happen too much, like let's say, the church preaches that everybody should always get married and is always talking about marriages and disregards single people, then the pendulum swings to the other side and single people are like, well, I don't ever want to hear about marriage anymore. I don't want married people to teach me or talk to me or have any input in my life. And that swings too far to the other side. I think what the Bible teaches is that both marriage is honorable and sanctified singleness is honorable. We see that Paul, says that when you are single and you have the ability to only give your affections to God. You don't have to split your affections rightfully when you're married. And so we see that a life of singleness, if celibately lived and lived for God as your only love, is something that is deeply honorable. But also a life of marriage is honorable, and we should hold marriage in honor in the church because it is an incredibly important institution that was founded by God. And in a society that is walking away from marriage, we have to increasingly teach on the importance of marriage and why things like shacking up and sleeping together and living together are not good for us, are not healthy for us, are not how God created. And when we go from one relationship to another in those ways of living together, sleeping together, being together, and living like a married couple, but not committing to a lifelong union in marriage, then we have so much brokenness within that system. Our hearts are deeply teared apart. We are joined together with so many different people, and to not live with those people and walk with those people, and we give our most vulnerable selves away over and over and over again, and those pieces over time just shatter, and it's extremely painful. And so as the church, we have to live into this, that let marriage be held in honor among all, meaning that the whole church should find the institution of marriage as honorable and good. And this is a good thing. And let the marriage bed be undefiled. And this is really important. I've heard this interpreted so many weird ways, but ultimately what this is talking about is that the marriage bed is sacred, and sex is more than a physical orgasm. Sex really is a union, and we get to see this in 1 Corinthians where Paul talks about having sex with prostitutes and how we are defiling the temple of God when we do this, and we are spiritually joining, not just physically joining with that person. And so to leave the marriage bed undefiled is to really not live into adultery. And we get that in this definition, for God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. And this takes a lot of different ways nowadays, in the prevalence of pornography. And this is not just like, let's say, one individual in the marriage living into a life of pornography, but where couples will bring pornography into their bed, or when there's one couple that's having an affair or having an adulterous relationship, these things defile the marriage bed. And so to live with your marriage bed undefiled is to live sexually pure in a way where you're only consummating the marriage and relationship with one person, and you are not going outside of that. And it is sacred. It is a sacred thing that God sees. In the Old Testament, when sex is talked about, it is to know each other. It is like the ultimate knowing experience that two humans can have. And so you'll read a lot of times in the Old Testament that so-and-so knew this person, and that means that they had sex with one another. And sex was the consummation of the covenant between two people of a lifelong union with one another. And so to defile the marriage bed with adultery, lust, and all these different things, it is to break covenant with that person. That's why when God describes Israel as someone who breaks covenant constantly, he calls Israel a whore. And the reason why he calls Israel a whore is because she has went and given herself over to all the other gods and has defiled the covenant with Yahweh. And when defiling the covenant with Yahweh, with Baal and Asherah and all these other gods, she was breaking covenant and joining in covenant with these other gods. And that is what it looks like. That's when God uses the analogy of Israel being a whore, it's because it's the same thing that adultery does in marriage. Is it defiles the covenant. It defiles and breaks covenant and creates covenant with other people. And it is damaging. I talked to one family psychologist who practiced for 40 years, and he told me at minimum it takes 1 year to recover, for a relationship to recover from this deep break in trust, adultery. And man, today often we just, we try to brush things under the rug, or we try to rush healing and process and trust. And this is the minimum. Sometimes it could take 5 years, 10 years to really rebuild that trust. And it takes work from both people to do that. And so it's really important. I think if we understand and marriage is held in honor, then it becomes harder for us to step out of our marriages. It becomes harder for us to defile our marriages. It's how the author of Hebrews has talked about the covenant with God, because he says if you are going to continue on deliberately sinning, then you are trampling on the blood of Christ. If you broke the law and you came under the penalty of death in the old covenant, how much more will our judgment be in this new covenant? It is that same thing, that if we see the gravity of our sin and we understand the depth of it, then we will realize, and I hope it would be harder, and I think that's the hope here, that it would be harder to defile the marriage bed. It would be harder to step out in judgment and sexual immorality, because we see what's at stake here. We see the depth of what we're doing, and a lot of times what gets us to adultery is minimizing what we're doing. And it starts off with, this is just a conversation, or just a text message, or just innocent flirting, and it's just a kiss, or it's just a little touch. And then we go all the way and we minimize what we're actually doing until we have fully breached. And then when we are found out is oftentimes when the weight really hits us of what happens. But if we have a good theology of marriage, and we have a good theology of sex and how sex consummates covenant and how the scripture talks about it, then it is a protector and a firewall for us when the enemy does come and bring temptation, because we see the depravity of what will be caused, the harm of what will be caused, that I'm sinning against God. I'm sinning against my spouse. I'm sinning against my own body and flesh. I'm sinning against, if I have children, against them. I'm sinning against the church, right? There is a lot at stake here. And it starts with keeping marriage in honor among the church, because as soon as marriage begins to lose its honorability, well, I mean, the covenant loses its honorability, and it's not such a big deal to step out of our marriage. It's not such a big deal, to sleep around and have affairs and walk in adultery. And so it starts there, and we have to carry it across, because this theology of marriage is really important in order, I think, to keep us safe from stepping out and falling into this type of sin. And, we get a promise here in the word that God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. We know that God will judge sin, so why tell us here? We know that. We've already talked about in Hebrews chapter 12 that God is the judge. But he mentions it here as an extra promise for an extra caution for us. That we have to remember that God is going to judge this. We're not going to escape. And again, it is adding extra protection and firewalls for us, because the enemy, to get us to commit adultery and sexual immorality, will downplay its effects. Oh, it's only a video that you're watching. Oh, no harm, no foul. You're never going to have to talk about it or tell anybody. Or, oh, they've been so rude or mean to you anyway. Or, oh, they've mistreated you in these ways, so you have the ability to do this. But when our theology of marriage is robust and our theology of sex is robust, and we understand that God created and instituted these things, and that there is more than just physical consequences for these things, but there's spiritual and emotional consequences for this, and ramifications of judgment for this, the hope is that it will keep us in the fear of God in order that we make wise decisions, as we talked about several classes ago. And so my prayer is that you reflect on your theology of marriage today, whether as a single person, someone who is married, someone who's no longer married, that you can take some time to really reflect on what marriage means in the scriptures. What does it look like to keep it held in honor? What does it look like to understand and live in a life that does not defile its bed? So thank you for joining on this class, and looking forward to continue. I mean, this just so much goodness and what is happening, really able to practically cover all these areas of life, and what does it mean to offer acceptable worship to God in all these different spaces.